all life is the result of descent from a common origin. It's common descent by natural selection. Yeah. Yeah.
Charles Darwin was born into a big family in the early 1800s. He was one of 6 different children, and they were a well-off family. His father was a doctor. He was well enough that he could afford to be sent to university. He could also afford to go on a self-funded expedition around the world on the Beagle. So, yeah, he was well off. His dad wanted him to be a medical doctor, or failing that, maybe an Anglican priest. But Darwin had his own ideas and was more interested in biology and geology and natural history, those things.
Well, he traveled on a HMS Beagle. He traveled around the world for about 5 years. And he just observed nature and was taken by the kind of the variation in various bird life and various things around the world. And he gathered evidence for the origin of species. And the idea actually was proposed years ago by Alfred Wallace. So it wasn't a new idea, but he's credited with the theory because he actually presented good evidence for it.
I think his book sold out quite quickly. It might have been a year or two before he really got much feedback on it. Some was very positive and some was very negative. I think as much as anything there would have been some sort of internal dilemma, because he had been brought up in the church and maybe to believe in a creator, and here he was showing evidence that species weren't stable as though they'd been created, that things were able to change from one thing to another over time.
The other aspect to it is that people were not happy with the idea that we're evolved from monkeys, if you like, and so there was a lot of cartoons around during that day that, you know, the evolutionists were kind of breed of monkeys or whatever and so on. And I think also there was a kind of feeling that, you know, there was a kind of hierarchy, because that's what Tree of Life is all about, hierarchies. Yes, and so man was at the top of it. And this meant that, I guess in a way, it kind of justified things like slavery to some people, because they were inferior people, and so it's okay for their slaves and so on. So I think there was that kind of feeling, but primarily it was the church, and God created the world, and man wasn't descended from monkeys.
I think Darwin's work has fundamentally altered the way we can perceive our place in nature. We're not apart from nature, we belong as part of the natural world, and we have to try and integrate ourselves more into the planet so we can survive in the long term.
Now, the other thing which has emerged more recently is making synthetic life. In other words, we know the bits and pieces, and can we actually put it together and reboot life from scratch, if you like? And that is you know, quite a fascinating thing, because that's a kind of as the New Scientist article says, a second Genesis. You know, that we can now, there's no reason why we can't make it different, or in fact even better, because we know how things work.
The cool thing about Darwin's theory, it's almost self-evident that if the more fit individuals survive, the ones that have the right genes, are able to reproduce, then that alters the frequencies of genes in the next populations. There's no way evolution cannot be happening. If we can look at things that are happening in animal populations and in the natural world now and extrapolate that into the longer term, then we can explain what happens over millions of years. That's really neat, I think.
You know, the world is complicated and a frightening place to be, but I think the alternative to not understanding what's going on is disaster. So I think we need to know how things work.